Honore, welcome back to session 3. I feel like this is a therapy session, probably more for me than for you. So I'm kind of like coming into the counselor's office and getting all my emotional needs met just by diving into this because it's
I
so
love it.
helpful.
I love it. Happy to serve as always.
So just send me a bill, for the
Okay.
therapy session. That's really
Oh,
all
okay.
that a podcast is. It's the podcast hosts therapy sessions
I like it.
in some in some respect. So here in this short episode, we're going to dive into what I consider the heartbeat of your new book, Write Your First Nonfiction Book, and this is what really prompted, uh, I guess, my email to you months ago about, hey, this would make a cool book, or I found this really riveting, which is the 8 chapters that you need in a short book, or not necessarily even a short book, but just any book. And I'm wondering if we could just walk through these briefly so people can know here's a way that you can structure the book that's not your typical book where all the chapters are kind of parallel with each other, but you're taking the reader on a journey. And I love
Yep.
this. So, chapter 1 is, and again, this is if you're doing a shorter book with 8 chapters, maybe this is even your first nonfiction book. Chapter 1 is encouragement. Talk about why you need a chapter right up front on encouragement with whatever the topic is.
Thank you. That's a great question. I think that in the transformative or inspirational nonfiction space, the goal of any author is to help people to go on a journey. And I think the first thing that people need in order to embark on a journey, especially writing a book, but I think anything, if you're going to do anything, learn a language, become a parent, be a better parent, change jobs, whatever, I think there has to be an element of this might feel too big for you, but I know
Mm.
you can do it. I did it and I know you can do it. And that's what chapter 1 is in this process, is to provide encouragement for the reader that they need to read the whole book and that they can do whatever it is the book is promising them they can do.
I wonder if sometimes those of us who write books for a living, if sometimes we forget that we're so wrapped up in the topic of the book and we know so much about it, we forget that it can feel intimidating to the reader, that maybe
Yeah.
this topic is brand new to them. So they do need that encouragement right up front. That can be really helpful.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so chapter 2 is stories and examples. And I love how you put this really almost like right up front of the book, because and I've seen you structure a lot of your books this way. I love how you do this because you're basically, before we get too deep into the journey, you're showing us here are people who have done it. Can you tell us a little bit about what we would put in that chapter where we have stories and examples?
Yep. So your story and example is a great one. Helping people to understand that as the author, it gives you credibility as the writer of the book, as the author of the book. But as humans, we are most riveted by the stories of other people, and we find ourselves in the
Hmm.
stories of other people. We'll watch movies like Rudy and say, okay, well, if the little guy could get into Notre Dame and play Notre Dame football, and look, he had all of these trials and tribulations, then gosh, maybe I could too. And so adding in stories of people who have started where the reader is starting, which is not finished in whatever the promise is, and sharing those stories, they will find themselves most likely in one of those people or some of those people. And they'll go, okay, well, if Honore can write a book, I mean, for the love of all that's holy, probably anyone can write a book, right? And so we find ourselves in stories. So as the author of a book, it's helpful that, and you don't have to do a whole chapter on it. You don't have to do it in chapter 2, but sprinkling the stories of other people who have applied your process or who have gotten the results that you've gotten in whatever it is you're writing about is really going to encourage the reader. So we start with the encouragement in chapter 1 and we move into
Okay.
stories in chapter 2. So like encouragement is, Kent, you can write a book. Okay, Kent. So you think that I'm crazy because I'm the author. And of course, I can write a book because it's my book. I wrote it. I'm the author. So you're a bar I can't reach. So, okay, Ken, I see you, and I'm going to show you a half dozen people or so throughout the book or in
Hmm.
this chapter that have also gone through these stages and come out the other side, and they've written a book. So if they can do it, then you can do it.
Now, kind of a granular question: when you're collecting these stories from people, so like in this book, you have in chapter 2 in this book, it's kind of meta because you've structured this book the same way that you're teaching people to structure a book, which
Yeah.
I love. So you have little sections from people like John Stange, uh, Brittany Stevens, Lucas Marino, Karen Hunsinger. When you're collecting these, how did you do that? Do you do this by Zoom, or do you just say, "Hey, would you be willing to be featured in this chapter? Can you write a few paragraphs that I could put in here?" I assume that's the way that you do it because it makes it way easier if they just write it to begin with.
I did. I sent it's interesting to see if people can follow directions or not. So
I
that's
bet.
always interesting because I've had many different books where I've asked people to contribute and I always give very clear directions. And then sometimes people just do whatever they want. And then I have learned to just go, if you can't follow directions, you can't be in my book because I don't have time to
Right.
go back and forth with someone.
Yeah.
So I sent out an email to people who I knew had published books
Mhm.
it within a short period of time, within a more recent time period, and asked them if they would mind being featured in the book, if they would talk about the different stages, if they recognize themselves in those stages, and if they would talk about traversing those stages and allow me to put it in the book, to feature them in the book. And there were a lot that submitted their stories. There were probably 40 people that submitted their stories, and there were
Really?
maybe a third of those. There were about a third of those that met the criteria of the book. And so out of those third, then I picked the ones that I felt would help anyone see themselves regardless
Hmm.
of age or gender or any other thing, right? I wanted to go across the map and um, help anyone find a story that would resonate with them.
Then what do you do with the rest of that material that you didn't use?
It's
You
in
just
my
don't use it?
just don't use it. Mm.
So, and I'm really interested in this because, like, if you say, "Hey, can you submit stuff?" and they send it to you and you decide not to use it, is there a weirdness there at all? Or, like, does anybody get upset, or how does that work?
I haven't had anyone get upset and tell me. I do let everyone know. I will say, "Congratulations, your story's been selected to be
Aha,
in this
okay,
book." I
okay,
have them sign a release. I have them sign a release that allows me to use it and to edit it for space and those sorts of things, but I'm
yeah,
also, again, limiting the space.
yes,
So when someone says, "Oh, 250 words, here's 1,000," like, "Okay, let's try again." Right? I'll say, "This is fantastic. You need to cut out one out of every 4 sentences makes the cut. So try again." If it's compelling enough, if it doesn't meet the criteria, again, I just have to move on to the next one. But to the
okay,
people who don't make it, I respond to them and say, "Thank you so much for your submission. I won't be using it in this book. I'll save it in case I have use for it another time. I really appreciate you because it took time and courage, as writing a
yeah.
book does, to submit. And so I want to honor and be respectful, and I don't ever write someone back and go, "Really?"
Yeah, yeah,
Maybe read the directions. I just if sometimes for whatever reason it's just not the right fit. And so I'm always, I want to not burn a bridge on the way out of town,
totally,
right? So
totally.
so I always say, "Thank you for your submission, and I'm going to write more books, and maybe there's a space for you in a future book. So let's stay in touch."
I love that. I love that. Um, let's do 2 more of these, then actually we'll do the last 4 in the next episode,
Okay.
because I ask a lot of questions, as anybody who went to
They're great.
college or grade school with me would tell you. I was that kid. So in the 3rd chapter, you're saying, give an overview of the process. Um, give us some insight about what we should put in there. What if we don't have a process? Is it something that we should create, and give us some tips on how to know what to put in that chapter?
Sure. So you do have a process. If you're writing a book, you have a process. You have something that you do to get from point A to point B. It could
Okay.
be the journey, it could be a recipe, it could be a formula, right? It's there's something, you're putting something in there, and there's a place that people are starting and there's a place they're trying to get to, and you're giving them the points along the way. I'm going to call that a
Yes.
process.
Okay.
If you do have a process,
You may just need to think through it and boil it
You
down a
may
little.
just need to think through it so that you can tell people, here's what we're going to do,
Okay.
right? So chapter 3 is the stages in the process. So you're going to go through these stages, and this is the process that I'm going to share with you. It's not
Okay.
the process like the Bible, it's a process. I make it very clear that it's malleable,
Okay.
customizable, but it's still what I used that works. And you're reading my book because you want to get a result that I have,
Okay.
right? And so that's what you're sharing.
So then chapter 4, so chapter 3 is the process, and chapter
Yeah.
4 is a short formula in the form of an acronym, process, or alliteration. How are chapter 3 and 4 different?
Well, so the chapter 3 is saying you are going to go through these stages and you want to include a process.
Okay.
Chapter 4 is my process. So I'm sharing it with you as it relates to me, like how I did it.
Okay. It's sort of
Here's
like the process in action as you're doing it.
yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Here's what I did. Here's how you can do it. So I think chapter 4 is where I did the outline for Prosperity for Writers, which follows this formula, which follows this process. And
Okay.
also I made one up. I made one up like on the spot. I was like, okay, can this work for anything? How about if I move to a new city and I want to get to know people? What happens in a new city? And I wrote an outline of 8
Yeah.
chapters based
Yeah.
on that to prove that it could be done just almost instantly. Like anyone can take this process, which is why I did it, because I wanted people to stop overthinking and getting stuck. I wanted them to
Yes.
just go, okay, I'm going to write this in chapter 1. Okay, she says to do this, I'm going to do it. I might change it later, but I'm going to at least get the words out of my head and on paper, because you can't edit a blank page. You can't
Yeah.
move chapters around that aren't written. So that's
The
the
thing that
difference.
I love about this the most is you can take something that's relatively short or compact. Like you don't have to have the world's most detailed process for doing whatever. Like you can have the quote unquote content or the framework for something, but then you're not spending 12 chapters breaking down that content with all this detail and everything. Like chapter 1, you're giving encouragement about it. Chapter 2, you're giving stories and examples. So it's almost like a diamond where you're taking the same basic idea and
Yep.
you're turning it and you're looking at it from a slightly different angle,
Yep. That's
which I
correct.
love that approach. This is why I think this is so refreshing.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
So in the next episode, thank you. This is great. We'll dive into chapters 5 through 8 and what's included in those. So I'll see you
Great.
in the next one.
Okay.